I couldn't help it. I'm back on my mini PC kick again. This is the Infplane Hilbert Super Workstation. Although once I got my hands on this, I realized it's not mini. This probably graduates out of that mini category into something a little bigger. Inside, it has an AMD Ryzen AI Max Plus processor in it, and I have been trying to get my hands on one of these computers or something like it for the last year or so, because it's doing a lot of interesting things. Now this version, this computer, the Hilbert, is a pre-release version of a PC that they are going to be releasing soon. If you're interested in this specific computer, I'll link to their website where you can sign up for email updates. They're going to be doing a Kickstarter and that sort of thing in the future. Now I mentioned at the top, I don't know if you can actually call this thing a mini PC. I did a series of videos a little over a year ago building out different art setups using mini PCs to see how cheap I could go to still get a good setup and good performance. Basically, how little could I spend to get an art setup that I didn't hate? And as I went through that process, I got a little better and better and better as I went. It was a lot of fun. This PC, not budget. It also completely smokes everything else I've ever tested at this category. I think that most of the reviewers who are currently testing this out are going to be looking at power and performance, and yeah, I'll get to that. But my favorite part is the liquid cooler inside, because I've gotten spoiled in recent years. For the longest time, I was using Intel-based Macs, and they sounded like a jet taking off every time you did any kind of task that may be even close to intensive. And in recent years, I have gotten used to these M-series chips that they're putting into these Macs. The fans almost never ever kick on for me. When I built the PC that is behind me in all these videos, I was focused on silent. I want this thing to be as quiet as possible. And the fans really only kick on that PC when I'm exporting videos or rendering something in Blender, and even then, they don't get that loud. The thing that drove me nuts about all these kind of smaller form factor PCs that I was testing is just how dang loud they got all the time. Even if I was just using them to edit videos, sometimes just surf the web doing work in Photoshop for sure would set them off. This thing is much quieter, and it really comes down to how they're cooling it. Now when it is running, it is not totally silent. There's a low hum of the fan pretty much going all the time. But what I like about it is it rarely glows above that low hum, even when I'm editing a video or working in Photoshop. In fact, the other day, I exported a video from it, and the fans didn't really kick in until about the 2-minute mark of the processing of that video. I was really impressed. Now, when I was playing games, that is when the fans would start to kick on. You're using that processing power for an extended period of time, and you're fully utilizing the GPU. Now, the fans that are in there when they're running aren't that loud, but they're definitely noticeable compared to my desktop, which is built not to make a lot of noise. The fans can jump to this super loud noise, but that was really rare. And when I was doing some of my Blender render tests and stuff, but having that baseline where 90 to 95% of the time the fans are in check, I really appreciated that. There are several other desktops that are very similar to this with very similar specs. The Framework comes to mind. Same processor, same price actually when you spec it out with the same exact components, but what separates this out is that water cooler. You can get the Framework with a Noctua fan. Those fans are known for being kind of quiet, so I am kind of curious how it performs in that regard. But one of the things that I have seen from other reviewers when they're talking about other manufacturers who are making similar machines is that they don't dissipate the heat as well. They do get a lot louder. When I was testing those other mini PCs, things like drawing in Krita, running Adobe apps like Photoshop and Illustrator, those were fine. But as you get to those heavier workloads, video editing, 3D rendering, especially in Blender, there's no way most mini PCs could just keep up. They're not a good call. Here, the performance I thought was really good, but there are some caveats. At the beating heart of this computer is that AMD Ryzen AI Max Plus 395 processor. Whew, I finally got it out right. I've recorded that line so many times. And when every other product under the sun has been putting the letters A and I in the name of their products for no good reason lately, this is the one exception to the rule. And that's because that Ryzen processor is designed for AI work tasks, because we also have 128 gigabytes of unified memory on this. Yes, in the year of our Lord, 2026, in the middle of a RAM crisis, you can find a computer with 128 gigabytes of RAM. What's the catch? Show them the price. Looky there. It just blows my mind to think 128 gigabytes of RAM. That is 10 times what Apple puts in the iPad Pro. So when I first saw the cube factor, I thought, cool, this looks like a super Steam machine. This is about 25% wider than the upcoming Steam machine. It's about 25% taller, 25% deeper, basically 25% more. And to put this in context, here's the Xbox Series X. The Steam machine is going to be like half the height of an Xbox Series X, but have similar dimensions. This obviously has a wider footprint. This is also really heavy. It comes down to the build materials. They're really high quality here. It has that outer aluminum shell, and I'm sure that the cooler inside weighs a ton too. The top of this reminds me of the Series X as well. It's pulling in air from the bottom and pushing it out through these vents in the top. We have a good number of ports here as well. We have a USB-A and a USB-C along the front. We also have a headphone jack there. We have 4 USB-As along the back, 2 more USB-Cs there, an HDMI 2.1, and 2 network ports. One of those is 2.5 gigabytes and the other one is 10 gigabytes. And even a display port. Love to see that. We're starting to see support in graphics tablets for high-end display ports, at least in the like higher end pro versions of those tablets. Okay. Performance. When we're talking about the Ryzen AI Max Plus 395, it is an impressive processor. For sure. But when we're talking about performance for price, whether you're going to get the value out of what you're actually spending to get this, really depends on how you plan on using this PC. This processor is designed for running AI models locally, and that is where it excels. It just so happens when you design a chip to do that specific thing really well, it also happens to excel at things like content creation and gaming. So what makes that processor special? It's how you can allocate that big pile of RAM into different tasks and split it up between your entire system or send it to your GPU. I really wanted to test this in Blender, and there's a few reasons why. If you're rendering a scene in Blender, your entire scene has to fit in within your GPU's VRAM in order to really take advantage of your GPU. If most GPUs these days have, 8 gigabytes of RAM, or on the higher end NVIDIA cards, we're going with 16 gigabytes. I think the top of the line 5090 right now has 32 gigabytes of RAM. But for a lot of people, 8 gigabytes is that limiting factor of what they can build. Now, I do want to stress here, we're talking about huge scenes, not these like piddly rocket ships that I make. A lot of 3D pros will optimize their scenes around the GPU's limitations that they have. Now, with 128 gigabytes of unified memory, you never, ever have to think about RAM again. How this works is you can jump into AMD software. It's called Adrenaline Edition, and in there we can go to that big pool of memory and decide how we want to allocate it. You can put up to 96 gigabytes in the GPU, so if you want to use it for Blender, go for it. Welcome to Planet Overkill. You will never need that much, but you can do it. If you're primarily focusing on Premiere Pro and editing video and you want more system memory than GPU memory, you could just allocate it in a different way. Here is the catch. You can't just flip the RAM allocation on and off on the fly. Every time you do that, every time you reallocate it, you have to reboot Windows in order to kind of reset your system and let it know how you're doing that allocation. So cool. Should you get this for Blender then? Well, there are some things to consider. One, it's nice to be able to throw as much RAM at a project that you need, for sure. But pure GPU power is still what a lot of people want when rendering in Blender. That's a more important stat than how much RAM you have. And while this processor is crazy impressive for what it is, it's still an iGPU, not a dedicated GPU. The 8060X graphics, as AMD calls it, is on par with like a 5060 NVIDIA card. Or if you're looking at laptops and laptop GPUs, I'd put it on par with like a 5070 variant. And when we're talking about price to performance, even with RAM prices being where they are, you can build an absolutely monster PC with a better GPU for $3,000. Even if you're paying out the nose for RAM. Another thing you'll find is on the gaming side of things, AMD has made great strides with FSR frame gen and upscaling that competes with NVIDIA's DLSS. On the 3D rendering side of things, though, pros really prefer NVIDIA's drivers over what AMD's offers. And if you jump on Reddit and ask people which you should get, the Blender folks will tell you full stop, go NVIDIA. And I would agree with them. And one of the main reasons is Cycles, the engine that I use to render a lot of things. That's the one that gives you those really nice soft shadows. Cycles is not optimized for AMD cards. It is optimized for NVIDIA cards. I mentioned gaming. We should talk about gaming because it's fun. Let's go there. This is another place where I can say that this is a pretty good experience. The fact that I can squeeze this good of performance out of an iGPU is really impressive. I mentioned all of those mini PCs that I'd used. They were really stuck at like, hey, maybe you could run a game at 30 frames per second at minimal settings. With an iGPU like this, you're getting, I don't know, 144p at 60 frames on most AAA games. At least that's what I was getting. I was playing Cyberpunk here at those settings, getting a consistent 6C with ray tracing turned off, of course, but the game's rendering at 1440p with some frame gen on. And I'm getting similar performance when I jumped over to Horizon Forbidden West. I thought it looked really impressive. And if you're willing to game at 1080p, the sky's the limit. Most games are going to run at a really good frame rate. Even a new game like Crimson Desert runs really, really well. High settings, 60 frames per second, a really good gaming experience. At least really impressive for an iGPU. This is good performance. These games are totally playable at what I would consider console quality. But this is another caveat. You can get that with a 5060 on a homemade PC for like half the price. So this is really a mixed bag when we're talking about gaming and creative work. Where this PC really makes sense is for software developers, which I am not. Software developers who want to run local AI models and are going to really take advantage of that RAM allocation and how this works. That is who this is designed for. And as a bonus, those people can also take advantage of the fact that it's pretty decent at gaming. Or if they're doing content creation on the side, it's pretty decent for that too. I think that's really your market. If your first job is content creation, I don't know if I'd go this route. If the thing you want to do the most on your computer is gaming, I'm not sure I'd go this route. Really, when you get into that $2,000 zone, you're trying to get as much performance as possible. And I think most people in that range say, hey, screw the size, screw the efficiency, screw the looks on my desk. I want power. I want performance. And they end up building a big, bulky PC with a dedicated GPU. You get a ton of processing power, but not enough VRAM. So this chip was designed to solve that problem. And personally, I think that makes a lot of sense. But what AMD is doing here is really interesting for the future of computing. And while I don't foresee myself ever needing this specific processor, there is a 64 gigabyte variant that makes a lot more sense. In fact, if you're doing creative work and that sort of thing, that would be the one that I would be looking at. Because first of all, you're going to save about $800. And splitting up 64 gigabytes to the GPU and system memory for creative work just makes a lot more sense to me. But what do you think? Let me know down below in the comments. Thank you all for watching, and I'll talk to you in a couple of days.